So, we have been talking about whether or not Ruth and Naomi faced a series of disasters or God's plan, and their character, their choices, and their commitment. So the last time that we met 2 weeks ago, we left Ruth doing the next thing to provide for her and Naomi. And she has gone to the harvest fields to glean the grain, to pick up the leftovers. So we're going to start in Ruth chapter 2 today, beginning at verse 2. One day Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the harvest fields to pick up the stalks of grain left behind by anyone who is kind enough to let me do it." Naomi replied, "All right, my daughter, go ahead." So Ruth went out to gather grain behind the harvesters. And as it happened, not coincidence though, she found herself working in a field that belonged to Boaz, the relative of her father-in-law Elimelech. And while she was there, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you," he said. "The Lord bless you," the harvesters replied. And then Boaz asked his foreman, "Who is that young woman over there? Who does she belong to?" So we see God's plan in action. Was she in Boaz's field by accident? Sorry. She didn't know who owned the field, nor did Naomi instruct her where she was to go. She said she would go to the field of anyone who was kind enough to let her work there. And so that's where she finds herself, right where God wanted her to be. So going on with verse 6 through 12, it says, "And the foreman replied, 'She is the young woman from Moab who came back with Naomi. And she asked me this morning if she could gather grain behind the harvesters. She has been hard at work ever since, except for a few minutes' rest in the shelter.' Boaz went over and he said to Ruth, 'Listen, my daughter, stay right here with us when you gather grain. Don't go to any other fields. Stay right behind the young women working in my field. See which part of the field they are harvesting in, and then follow them. I have warned the young men to not treat you roughly. And when you are thirsty, help yourself to the water that they have drawn from the well.'" So there's God's protection over her. It wasn't necessarily a safe place for a young, beautiful woman to be without someone to protect her. Ruth fell at his feet, and she thanked him warmly. "What have I done to deserve such kindness?" she asked. "I am only a foreigner." "Yes, I know," Boaz replied, "but I also know about everything you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. I have heard how you left your father and mother in your own land to live here among complete strangers. May the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, reward you fully for what you have done." To me, those are key words that, she is under God's protection. She is under his wings. She went there to take refuge. She sought being with the God of her mother-in-law. She wanted Naomi's God for her God. So last 2 weeks ago, we talked a bit about reputation. And her character had been noticed just in the things that the everyday things that she did. Just her service to Naomi, her love for Naomi, her willingness to work. She wasn't doing any big spectacular job that would be noticed. She was just gleaning in the fields, but she was faithful, and her character showed. Her character, her commitment to her mother-in-law. So going on, verses 13 through 17, she says, I hope to continue to please you, sir. You have comforted me by speaking kindly to me, even though I am not one of your workers. And at mealtime, Boaz called to her, come over here and help yourself to some food. You can dip your bread in the sour wine. So she sat with his harvesters, and Boaz gave her roasted grain to eat. She ate all she wanted, and she had some left over. And we're going to see in a few minutes what she did with the leftovers. She didn't feed the birds. Okay. When Ruth went back to work again, Boaz ordered his young men, let her gather grain among the sheaves without stopping her, and pull out some heads of barley from the bundles and drop them on purpose for her. Let her pick them up, and don't give her a hard time. So Ruth gathered barley there all day, and when she beat out the grain that evening, it filled an entire basket. She carried the basket back into town and showed it to her mother-in-law. Ruth also gave her the roasted grain that was left over from her meal. She didn't save it for herself, she saved it for her mother-in-law. I thought that was pretty special. So now we've seen Boaz enter the picture. He's the next character we're going to look at. So what do we know about him? First of all, his character. Ruth 2:1 tells us that he was an influential man in Bethlehem. He was a wealthy farmer. We see kindness to those in need. He was kind to the gleaners. He was kind to Ruth. He cared for his workers. He cared about what happened to them in the fields. You know, he was kind to all of them. He recognized the kindness of Ruth to Naomi. So was he a good judge of character? That was part of his character, being a good judge of character. I think God wants that in us too. So in Boaz's profile, too much stuff. Says, heroes are easier to admire than to define. They are seldom conscious of their moments of heroism, and others may not recognize their acts as heroic. Heroes simply do the right thing at the right time, whether or not they realize the impact their actions will have. You know, if we're always looking for the impact that my actions are going to have, we probably aren't going to be having the actions that God would have us have. Perhaps the one quality that heroes share is a tendency to think of others before they think of themselves. Boaz was a hero. In his dealings with other people, he was always sensitive to their needs. His words to his employees, his relatives, and others were colored with kindness. He offered help openly and not grudgingly. And that's so important. The attitude that we offer our help with is so important. So we looked a little bit at his character, his choices. He allowed Ruth to stay exclusively in his fields. Protection for her, that was a choice. He asked his harvesters to drop extra grain for her. I thought that was really, really special. He provided food and drink for his employees. He wanted to be sure that they were properly nourished and rested and, you know, had their breaks. And, you know, you think about that on your own job or a job you may have had in the past, and that's pretty important. And the people who don't take the breaks are usually not real productive partway through the day. They just kind of fade. Oh, I don't have time for a break. I've got too much to do. I'm too busy. I'm too this or that. And that doesn't always go well. God intended for us to have rest and to have proper nourishment. So his commitment, he was committed to his family, and he realized that Naomi was his cousin's widow. He was committed to his responsibilities, and he was a man of integrity and honesty. So after day one, Ruth went home from the fields, and she's been successful. She took an entire basket of grain home, and we see Naomi's response, and Naomi's attitude begins to change in response to God's goodness. In Ruth chapter 2, beginning at verse 19, Naomi says to Ruth, "Where did you gather all this grain today? Where did you work? May the Lord bless the one who helped you." And remember, Naomi still doesn't know. Nobody sent Ruth to this place except God, okay? So Naomi said, "May the Lord bless him, whoever he is." And Ruth says, "The man I worked with today is named Boaz." Naomi told her daughter-in-law, "He is showing his kindness to us as well as to your dead husband, because that man is one of our closest relatives, one of our family redeemers." And Boaz didn't tell Ruth who he was, you know. He wasn't like immediately spouting, I am, you know. So I thought that was interesting too. And then Ruth said, "What's more, Boaz even told me to come back and stay with his harvesters until the entire harvest was completed." So Naomi, as we remember from a couple weeks ago, has been bitter. She was angry at God for the things that had happened to her, and she even wanted to change her name to Mara, which means bitter. Naomi had felt bitter, but her faith in God was still alive, and she praised God for Boaz's kindness to Ruth in her sorrows. She still trusted God and acknowledged his goodness. We may feel bitter about a situation, but we must not ever despair. Today is always a new opportunity for experiencing God's care. So Naomi says, "Good, do as he said, my daughter. Stay with his young women right through the whole harvest. You might be harassed in other fields, but you will be safe with him." So Ruth worked alongside the women in Boaz's fields, and she gathered grain with them until the end of the barley harvest. So we're not talking about just a day or two. This is a short book in the Bible, but it didn't happen all in a very short period of time. She continued to be faithful, still picking up the leftovers, still doing what God had asked her to do every day. She continued working with them also through the wheat harvest. So that was the next crop that came along. And all the while, she continued to live with her mother-in-law. So a series of disasters or God's plan. No coincidences in God's economy, and no good luck. There is no such thing as good luck. We hear that all the time. Good luck for this, good luck for that, good luck, good luck, good luck. You know. Crossing your fingers, yeah. Cross your fingers, cross your toes, cross everything, yeah. God's leading, his timing. Ruth did not search out Boaz's field. She did not even know when he was. That's a real key, important thing to remember. She did not know who he was. She did not go looking for him. So think about God, how God has directed your life for his purposes. It's best understood looking back. Lots of times we think, how can this possibly be part of God's plan? I know in my own life, the things that have been the hardest, the things that have hurt the most, have been the things that have taught me best, and the things that have made it possible for me to be standing here in front of you today. Not to be standing here, but to be doing what God's asked me to do. We've all had them, unexpected circumstances, changes we didn't anticipate, requiring a different path, a job change, a move, whatever it might be. I want to read you a little something. When my life is in transition, perhaps I'm not at my loveliest. My heart may be discouraged, and my reactions uncalculated, and I may be struggling to trust God for the future. but the believer holds to the history of God's faithfulness in past seasons while trusting Him for what's to come. I can trust God for what He holds in my future. He is a God who orchestrates beautiful things out of messy transitions. In His unlimited knowledge and power, He is sovereign over what is to come. And that's from a little devotional book that I read, that it's All Creatures Great and Small. It's actually talking about mountain goats, but I didn't read the whole thing. So we see in verse 23 Ruth's continued faithfulness, her character, her continued choices, and her continued commitment. Continuing to show up for work in the fields, choosing to continue living with Naomi and caring for Naomi. I want to read you a little excerpt from the 100 Women of the Bible about Ruth. It says, the industrious woman stood out to Boaz, and he commanded his servants to watch over her, making certain that she had enough grain. He told Ruth to stay close to his servant girls for protection. He even told her to share his workers' food and water. Humbled, Ruth wondered why he would be so generous. And Boaz replied that he had heard what she had done for Naomi. Okay? So important, our everyday lives. That's what people say. It's not what we say when we open our mouth, it's how we live. But this wealthy landowner, who was a close enough relative to be a kinsman redeemer, there's those words again, was about to do even more for the women. So Naomi's hope for the future began to come alive when she realized what was happening and that Boaz was a family redeemer. So we go on to chapter 3. I only need about 3 tables. No, I'm fine. It's okay. One day, Naomi said to Ruth, my daughter, it's time that I found a permanent home for you so that you will be provided for. Boaz is a close relative of ours, and he's been very kind by letting you gather grain with his young women. Tonight, he will be winnowing barley at the threshing floor, so do as I tell you. Now, this is where it gets a little different, some unusual advice. I have to tell you a funny story. My daughter was going through some difficulties, and I told her she needed to read the book of Esther because I kind of felt like it was for such a time as this. Well, she called me a little while later, and she said, why on earth would you tell me to go lay at some man's feet? I said, you read Ruth. I told you to read Esther. So anyway, she didn't appreciate the unusual advice either. So anyway, go to the threshing floor, but don't let Boaz see you until he is finished eating and drinking. Be sure to notice where he lies down, and then go and uncover his feet and lie down there, and he will tell you what to do. Now, think about this. She's not from this culture. She probably doesn't understand what any of this means, but she trusts her mother-in-law. So Ruth replied, I will do everything you say. So she went to the threshing floor that night, and she followed the instructions of her mother-in-law. After Boaz had finished eating and drinking, and he was in good spirits, he lay down at the far end of the pile of grain and went to sleep. Then Ruth came quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down, just as Naomi had told her. Around midnight, Boaz woke up and turned over and was surprised to find a woman lying at his feet. Who are you? He asked. I am your servant Ruth, she replied. Spread the corner of your covering over me, for you are my family redeemer. So we keep hearing family redeemer. And so I have asked Peter if he would be willing to explain to us the significance of Family Redeemer and how it impacts us now. And so. I know he can say it way better than me.
Can I reorganize this a little?
You can do anything you want. You want me to take that off here?
I'll just stick it right here, then I can put it back just the way it was. The idea of kinsman redeemer or family redeemer, what translation do you use? What translation do you use? New Living. Okay. Yeah, the family redeemer, kinsman redeemer idea comes from Leviticus. It's Levitical law. There's a great statement, if you jump back to Leviticus chapter 25, and I know you've read these sections in Leviticus with deep affection over the years. You say, where's that from? Oh, Leviticus. Oh, yeah, I remember.
We had a minister visit us. Can't remember his name now. He had several daughters. And then he started dating. The only way you can marry my daughter is if you can memorize them.
Oh, there's a filter. That's going to weed them out. Oh, goodness. So in Leviticus 25, verse 23, God says something to the people through Moses that's rather interesting, because you're aware of the history with the Jews that this land was given to them by God, and that's one of the recurring themes, the way they defend it, the way they legitimize their holding of it. One of the things the prophets say to them, if you don't clean up your act, you're going to lose this land God gave you. But God gave them the land in a really interesting framework. So in Leviticus 25:23, this is a Levitical law passed down through Moses to the people. The land must not be sold permanently, because the land is mine, and you are aliens and my tenants. Kind of changes the relationship there. God wants them to be responsible. He is giving them the land, but it's not like I give you the land and then I throw up my hands and walk away. It's still God's land, and they're his tenants. So in the framework of being a tenant, they've got to take care of it. And the way to take care of it is it can't be sold even between tribes. If you were from the tribe of Judah and you became so poverty-stricken that you lost your land, somebody from the tribe of Zebulun could come down and buy that land, but not permanently, not forever. In fact, even if no one in the family redeemed the land in your lifetime, during the Jubilee celebration, all the land went back to the original family clan as it was. God had this reset button in the people of Israel. It's kind of a cool setup there. So part of the aspect of this redemption is that they were responsible to keep the land not only amongst Jews, but within their clans. So then you go on to just a few verses later. Let's see. Yeah, in fact, it's the next verse, 26. If, however, a man has no one to redeem it for himself, and he prospers, he can redeem it. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed one. Verse 25. I went too far. Verse 25. So chapter 25, verse 25. If one of your countrymen becomes poor and sells some of his property, his nearest relative is to come and redeem what the countryman has sold. Even if that man can't redeem it, then if that man prospers, he can come back and redeem it. And they give some guidelines for the value of the land. And it's repeated a little bit later in that chapter. So the whole key idea is that land was to be kept within a family clan group. And effort was to be made with this. And what they did was they literally went from you know, who's the first cousin, who's the second cousin, who's the third cousin, and they worked their way out to find someone who could redeem the land and keep it in the family that way. The other thing this is connected to is in Deuteronomy 25. Not only is the land to be redeemed, but a family name is to be redeemed. This Deuteronomy 25 has singularly one of the most important kitchen rules. This is a little left-hand turn, Bonnie. When I was studying for this, I thought, oh, I got to get this in. Okay, this is one of the most important kitchen rules to be instituted by the Word of God. Oh, I like that. Deuteronomy 25:4. Do not muzzle the ox while it is treading out the grain. So snacking while you're cooking is okay. Has nothing to do with what Bonnie asked me to talk about, but it's too important to miss. Yeah. And probably if you or I walk through the kitchen, we can help graze. Yes, that's important, okay? So, quality control. Actually, the part I was going to point out is the next verse, 25:5. If a brother living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. So the idea of redeeming a family bloodline was just as important as redeeming a land possession. So it says her husband's brother should take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother, and the first son she bears carries on the name of that deceased member. So in God's plan, there was redemption of the land and there was redemption of the bloodline. And at some point, the two can intermix as they do here in Ruth. They didn't always do that, okay? There wasn't always a member of the family that needed to be married, but in this particular situation, in Ruth's family, as the daughter-in-law of Elimelech, whose family is now dying out because Elimelech has passed away and his two sons are dead. So to keep the family line alive, there's an obligation for a redeemer to come in and marry the widow and continue the line. So you've got a family redemption for land and a family redemption for the bloodline.
Thank you. You're welcome. I knew he could explain that so much better than I could. So, so Boaz's response showed his character and his commitment by his choices. We're going to look in chapter 3, beginning at verse 10, Boaz's reaction when he finds this woman at his feet. And he realizes who she is. It must have been kind of dark in there because he already knew her. You know, he had met her, but he couldn't tell who that was down there at his feet. So he says, "The Lord bless you, my daughter. You are showing even more family loyalty now than you did before, for you have not gone after a younger man, whether rich or poor." So this tells us that Boaz was older than Ruth. Apparently had never been married. At least he had no other descendants. And here she is, a beautiful young woman from another country who's doesn't really know their rules, their religious regulations. And she could have easily found a husband her age, someone younger. Don't worry about a thing, my daughter. I will do what is necessary, for everyone in town knows that you are a virtuous woman. There's her reputation again, her character. Just by the way she lived, everyone in town knew about Ruth. and that she was a virtuous woman. While it is true that I am one of your family redeemers, there that is again, there is another man. As Peter mentioned, they go by the closest relative. So Boaz says, there's another man who is more closely related to you than I am. So stay here tonight, and in the morning I will talk to him. If he is willing to redeem you, then very well. Let him marry you. But if he is not willing, then as surely as the Lord lives, I will redeem you myself. Interesting proposal, huh? Young women today would not understand that at all. So he says to her, lie down here until morning. So Ruth lay at Boaz's feet until the morning. But she got up before it was light enough for people to recognize each other. For Boaz had said, no one must know that a woman was here at the threshing floor. So Boaz said to her, bring your cloak and spread it out. And he measured 6 scoops of barley into the cloak, placed it on her back, and then he returned to town. So he's concerned, his character, he's concerned about her reputation. So he doesn't just care about himself and, oh, I'm going to maybe get some more land and all of that. He's concerned about Ruth. So her actions, again, we look at her character. She didn't look for a younger man. God had a plan for her, for all things. Our future, our path, our mate, our job, where we live, it's all part of his plan. Sometimes we go against his plan. Sometimes he smiles and helps us and works it out anyway. And that's a wonderful thing when that happens. And sometimes we pay for the consequences of our behavior when we want to go our own way. But Ruth did what she was supposed to. Boaz recognized she was a virtuous woman. So how would he know that? You know, how would he know that? Word of mouth, things that people said about her, the way he saw her behavior. He speaks truth to her that there's another man that is more closely related. He could have tried to go on with it, maybe a little bit underhanded. I'm not sure. If the other guy found out about it, then what happens? I don't know. But we've seen that he's a man of integrity, and he did what was the right thing to do. Ruth was submissive to Boaz. We see her submission and following her instructions, his instructions to her, exactly the way that he told her to do it. And she continued to be loyal, caring for Naomi. She was obedient, and God always blesses obedience. God has a plan for each one of us. So I write down little quotes, and usually I don't know where they came from. This one says, rejoice, God has planned ahead for you, and he's made all the necessary arrangements. He is your guide and your benefactor, so put your hand in his. I taught Ruth once before at a ladies' Bible study in Rodman. Sorry, guys. And I went back to my notes from then, and I want to read you something that, this was very shortly after my husband died. God has a plan for your life and mine. The pattern of our lives is not by chance. Even in the bad things that cause us fear, grief, and pain, we can find sweetness in the cup that we once thought to be bitter. For God will be in it, and his tremendous love and reassurance will be in it. God's solution to grief, taken from the book To Live Again by Catherine Marshall. And this is a quote from that book. You must accept what God sends you. Only in acceptance lies peace, not in forgetting or in resignation or in too much busyness. God says, my will is good, acceptable, and perfect. Acceptance is this: I trust the goodwill and the love of my God. I will open my arms and my understanding to what he has allowed to come to me. Since I know he means to work all things together for good, I consent to this with the hope for what the future will bring. End quote. And that can apply to any of the things that happen in our lives, to any of us. So Ruth 3:18, the last verse says, Naomi said to her, just be patient, my daughter, until we hear what happens. The man won't rest until he has settled things today. We don't like to wait. We don't like to be patient, do we? We don't like that at all. Isaiah 40:28-31 says, have you never heard? Have you never understood? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of all the earth. He never grows weak or weary. No one can measure the depths of his understanding. He gives power to the weak, strength to the powerless. Even youths will become weak and tired, and young men will fall in exhaustion. But those who trust in the Lord will find new strength. They will soar high on wings like eagles. They will run and not go weary. They will walk and not faint. So, thank you for listening. Lord, I just ask that you would bless the rest of our time together today. In Jesus' name. I have a song they're going to play, and